Okay, let's look at some more challenges to operationalizing resilience. We'll look at other administrative challenges next. Social challenges, in addition to the cognitive biases and limitations just introduced, and in many ways linked to them, there are a number of social constraints undermining resilience. Can be expected, right? So one of the more commonsensical social constraint for resilience is connected to the human desire for social status, especially in the modern world where social status is increasingly equated with consumption. You do not have to be religious to see the parallels between the consumerist lifestyle of the affluent and the worship of the Mammon or Haman warned against in Christian and Muslim traditions. There are also Indian traditions which the author is not aware of, I guess. As long as consumption is the main process through which individuals gain social status among their peers, we are in trouble. Other norms and values need to be revitalized, not only within the minority groups of environmentally and social justice-minded people, but they may be already on the way in terms of being aware of their status being linked to consumption. But even the more general population needs to be, aware that they are trapped in this kind of intrinsic social it's called an extrinsic value, where your image, your power, your tributary attribution of being rich and powerful and stylish and so on are actually something you enjoy, and now they come with a environmental footprint that may be unacceptable. Such social challenges undermined by various forms of groupthink, in which the desire for consensus and conformity within groups leads to inappropriate decisions or non-decisions. Being silent or quiet or inactive when such collective challenges are in front of us is also actually a bad thing, regardless if by not acting you are actually making a choice, right? Regardless if the reasons are cognitive or social, human beings have a tendency to believe or do the same as others. So this cultural meme, as it's often referred to, can be very powerful. This accelerating diffusion of a belief or behavior is referred to as a bandwagon effect, in which the probability of an individual adopting it increases with the proportion of the group already doing so. Imagine what change could ensue if the bandwagon would start to roll in a more sustainable direction. So it's a bad thing that we can follow bad examples, but it may mean that we also are capable of following good example, and peer pressure does work. A lot of evidence is there to show that environmental action can have peer pressure, which is part of the bandwagon effect. Related phenomenon are the false consensus effect, which is a tendency to expect others to agree with oneself, or projection bias, a tendency to assume that others share similar beliefs to oneself. These lead to individuals assuming their behavior and beliefs to be normal, whereas behavior and beliefs that differ from their own are deemed to be deviant. So this occurs in many ways. A friend who doesn't like drinking alone says anybody who drinks alone is headed to self-destruction, or and so on. Furthermore, human beings tend to attribute their own behavior to situational constraints, while attributing the behavior of others to their abilities, personalities, and intentions. So when they do something, they say they have no choice, no agency in what they are doing, and so on. But when others do something which is called deviant, then they blame the person. This is referred to as the fundamental attribution error, and leads agents to perceive the actions of other agents as acting in their own interests, while describing their own actions as the best way they could in the face of contextual restrictions. This polarization of perception is particularly pronounced when attention is focused on what the others are doing or not doing. Communication is poor and initial distrust is high. No wonder why international negotiations on different sustainability challenges seldom succeed. Okay, the fundamental attribution error is making people prone to scapegoating others when something has gone wrong. Here, the hindsight bias plays an important social role in undermining resilience. When looking back at a destructive event, the observer has the benefit of retrospection. In other words, ability to look back on a sequence of events of which we know the outcome. The observer can, with relative ease, identify what could or should have been done to prevent the event, and most often blame particular individuals that were closest in space and time for not doing so. A complex course of events is thus reduced to simple human error, hence largely abandoning the opportunity to actually learn how to stop such events from happening again. This plays out at various scales. I was interviewed on some European TV about the dam collapse in Libya that killed many people with the Mediterranean cyclone, and immediately there were blames placed on people who were not maintaining the dam. The fact I had to point out was that the brick and mud dam that was designed for a certain rainfall amount they are used to was exceeded by many folds. A year's worth of rain fell in 6 hours, so even with maintenance it was very unlikely that the dam would have withstood the deluge that came behind it. So it's easy to blame the dam keepers and the government for not doing, and so on and so forth, right? Scapegoating is not only happening between individuals but also between groups. Social identity theory explains this by showing that even the most randomly constructed groups tend to describe themselves and their members favorably while disparaging other groups and their members. The motivation for such in-group out-group bias, us versus them, is that positive stereotyping of the members of the group and negative stereotyping of the non-members serve to maintain a positive self-image. It's part of the tributary power, or this bias of image. However, the downside of it in relation to sustainability is significant, especially since most sustainability challenges require cooperation between organizations, sectors, disciplines, and countries. Distrust, perceived injustices, and scapegoating are not at all helpful when needing to work together, and community trust and social institutions have proven vital for sustainable management of common resources. So we'll cover Ostrom's work in a set of podcasts based on book by Janssen and Andries and Jensen, as I mentioned. So we'll look at these there. So there is scales of things involved as well. Even Ostrom's work shows that when you talk about a bunch of farmers managing their own irrigation system with their own set of rules, norms, and punishments co-developed together versus international negotiations on climate change or sustainable development, or even multi-city discussions in the same country, can get very complicated in terms of distrust, perceived injustices, and scapegoating. Okay, so here is the social bias that often leads to distrust, scapegoating between groups. So here is one group surrounded by a huge group. You can imagine it looks like a firing squad with the people in the middle being blamed for having caused some disaster which may very well be not their fault, but they can be scapegoated. So social constraints for resilience also include various byproducts of culture. Aside from being a central source of knowledge, skills, organization, rules and norms, etc., there are crucial let me read the sentence again. Social constraints for resilience also include various byproducts of culture. Aside from being a central source of knowledge, skills, organization, rules, norms, etc., that are crucial for resilience, culture may also entail aspects that undermine resilience. Culture may justify social structures that put some groups at increased risk in relation to specific events. For example, norms concerning women's clothing have been described as part of the reason why women are disproportionately affected in particular destructive events, since restrictive clothing hampers running and swimming. I think you know what they are talking about, but you want to be careful about how you say it. Other cultural norms make young men prone to take risks that are clearly visible in mortality and morbidity statistics. Effective proactive measures for reducing the risk of deviations away from preferred expected development scenario may not be culturally accepted and restricting what can be done in practice. Such byproducts of culture should not be ignored, even if they are often sensitive issues to address. So you are trying to move on many fronts in terms of what needs to be done for staying on the path to sustainable development and operationalizing resilience to stay on this path for the long haul. But you are dealing with many evolutionary biases, many cultural mores and practices, cultural memes, and so on. And these are not trivial issues when it comes to collective actions and sustaining the commons and trying to achieve the triumph of the commons, as Andries and Janssen call it, or Elinor Ostrom called it. Her message is optimistic in the sense with proper rules, norms and punishments you can sustain the commons and achieve triumphs of the commons, or avoid the tragedies of the commons, which we will discuss in that book. But actually, at any scale beyond the simple scales, things get more and more complicated as you try to combine intrinsic biases with cultural values and so on. And many times, as we said, what appears to be negative can that also be flipped in the positive direction to keep snowballing, to make resilience possible. So those are interesting discussions, but we should always keep very keen eye on the barriers. So next we will look at technical and environmental challenges in operationalizing resilience. Okay, I find these discussions very useful and important and unavoidable if we want to actually operationalize resilience. Okay, so we'll come back and discuss more.